that's where it needed realignment. So if Jesus was reflecting on the institution of Judaism, I wonder what Jesus would say today about the institution of Christianity. Are there places where we become so caught in the letter of the law that we forget the spirit of it? Where adherence to the letter of the law supersedes human compassion? Or where the Bible serves primarily as a rule of measure for purity rather than seeking to love God and neighbor? Now, it might be hard for us to see that when we're inside the institution of the church, but of course there are amazing, wonderful works of compassion that we are doing, not just PCC, but the Church Universal. And those are good things to be celebrated. But sometimes when someone stands outside the church, someone who didn't grow up in the church, someone who doesn't understand, they might look at the church and say, gosh, they spend a lot of time arguing over what's right or what's wrong, or what we should do or not do. I think it was interesting that the commentator, William Williamson, quotes, in a recent nationwide poll, young adults were asked why they avoided church, and they complained it's just too judgmental. We might just want to keep that in mind as a church universal. We want people to know we are Christians by our love and not just by a list of what we do or not do. It seems there are many issues that are related to this notion of purity or purity code. And recently the PCUSA at its General Assembly has once again been reflecting on that issue in the ordination standards for the gay and lesbian community in particular. And I recognize that we may not all be in agreement about that in this room, and that's fine, and you're welcome to disagree with me on that issue. My family itself is divided on this issue. I grew up in a church that was very clear on one side of the issue, and because of that, I feel like I have respect for both sides and understand that we can stand on the Bible on both sides of the dialogue. And I believe God calls us to have compassion with each other in the discussion. But to me, when I read this story that was the lectionary story for this week, I can't help but see it and not see it through this lens of Jesus commenting on the purity code and wonder how that applies to our church today in the 21st century. It seems to me Jesus was trying to reorient the discussion away from purity or non-purity and to how we treat each other with compassion, and if we are living by the law of love. And I say this in part to highlight that the Bible can be used on both sides of this issue. So often one side will only say that the Bible only seeks to uphold one side of this issue, and I believe that there are many ways that we can look at it. Because Jesus knew very well the purity code of his day. He knew the Mosaic law very well. And yet in Matthew 22:40, he says that on these two commandments, the ones that we're referred to today, loving God and loving neighbor, hang all the law and the prophets. All of them hang on these two commandments. Perhaps Jesus is saying that the law of love is the most important law of all. Now, it seems to me that there were obviously several overtures that were discussed last week at GA, and Linda Lee was there as the moderator of San Francisco Presbytery, and we had a young adult advisory delegate that was there, and there were many overtures that are important for us to reflect on. We don't want to give all our time and attention to one issue. But the GA actually passed an amendment to the famous amendment on ordination standards. And as I read the new amendment, it seems that the PCUSA is trying to reorient itself away from simply conversation about sexual identity or orientation and back to how can we joyfully serve God in a way that still stands on Scripture, but is perhaps more inclusive. Because what the new amendment does is leave jurisdiction to the local presbyteries and governing bodies to decide this issue for itself. Now, that will not become law in our Constitution until it's passed by a majority of the presbyteries, but it seems to me like it might be an interesting solution. It might help us agree to disagree on this issue and understand our diversity on this issue, because we will be able to, again, leave the decision to local governing bodies on how it best fits with their understanding of Scripture. To do this, it seems it would be also taking a page of wisdom from another denomination, namely the United Church of Christ. And as you know, I served a church there for 5 years while I was still active with the Presbyterian. And there are many things that the UCC could learn from Presbyterians, but this is one issue that the UCC have somehow resolved. They're not fighting about this issue. They don't spend time, energy, money, resources, trees, paper on this issue. They're just not fighting about it. It's really interesting to walk into that and to see how they've resolved it. Part of how they've resolved it is to let local churches and governing bodies decide it for themselves. And many people are worried that if an amendment like this passes, that there are many who would leave the denomination. And from my vantage point, what I think is interesting is that people are not noticing the number of people that are already leaving this denomination in the other direction, that are not happy with the ordination standards as they stand and are flocking to the UCC as a result. The number of people that I met who are former Presbyterians is really quite staggering. And they've left the Presbyterian Church because of this issue and because they feel that the UCC is more inclusive. Because the UCC is out there doing commercials, literally on television, about how they want to include rather than exclude. That is a witness that is going out to the wider body that says they're trying to reorient themselves in a different way. This issue became particularly close to my heart after serving in a UCC church, and we had an MCC church that nested with us. The word nest means when a new church development doesn't have money to buy its own building, and so it will rent space from another church. So our services were at 10, they would come in at noon. And the MCC, Metropolitan Community Church, is an all-gay and lesbian denomination. And as I got to know the people there, I would often stay after worship and worship with them. They were from every denomination, every single denomination you could think of. And they had left their other denominations and come to the UCC because they felt safe there, because they felt welcome there. And I heard the stories of person after person after person who had been so hurt by their own denomination, who felt that they were not welcome, who felt that they could not come to the table and even receive the Lord's Supper. And in the MCC, they do communion every single Sunday simply to let people know that they are welcome. It was months before I could witness a communion in an MCC church and not weep, because I knew what it meant to them. That is a deep hurt and a deep wound, to be told that you are not included in the love or family of God. And that is one that I desire to pour healing oil on and say, no, the church loves you. Even if we cannot agree on ordination standards or on exactly what we should do, I hope that we as a larger community, capital C, are a church that communicates that the law of love is one that is in our hearts. So again, I don't know where you stand on this issue, and I believe in diversity and that it's okay for us to disagree. But I would hope that taking from this passage today, we can reorient our minds sometimes, beyond just thinking of the do's and don'ts that the Bible might give us, and ask the question, are we living according to the 2 commandments that Jesus lifted up as the most important of all? To love the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love our neighbor as ourselves. And our neighbor might be that person who is different from us, that person that we feel or fear would make us unclean, the person we're not even sure how to reach out to. But God equips us and strengthens us to live with hearts of compassion. So may God's grace be with us as we seek to do that today.